Anastasia. Today, people don't understand the genuine meaning of the ancient expression true belligerence. Yet true belligerence for man is by no means a manifestation of his aggression, hatred, or malice in the visible world. True belligerence is a manifestation of the warrior's firmness in spirit of the fight with his animal nature or the animal mind. This is a characteristic of a struggle in the invisible world between light and darkness, as legends say. Rigdon. Absolutely. Waffle is the warrior who does not hone his skills in battle. So getting back to the subject matter. A hidden symbol of the right essence in the ancient Chinese mythology was Bai Di, the ruler of the West, the White Emperor, that is the spirit by the name of Zhao Jun, which means the calling one and the repelling one. The embodiment of this spirit was Bai Hu, the white tiger, the beast that instills fear in all sorts of evil spirits, patron of the West. Incidentally, the white tiger, the hidden symbol of the right essence, and the green dragon, the hidden symbol of the left essence, were drawn in medieval China as guardians on the gates of the Taoist temples. Together, they were worshipped as the guardian spirits of doors. Given that the right and the left essences also act as triggers of emotions and thoughts from the animal nature, their guardian functions and the door they protect had a sacred meaning. The latter meant that without conquering these two guardians inside himself, a human will not be able to enter the spiritual world. And finally, the hidden symbol of the left essence was Kang Di, the sovereign of the East, the azure ruler, that is the spirit named Lin Wei Yang, miraculous, powerful, looking upwards. And the embodiment of this spirit was Queen Long, the azure dragon. Images of the azure dragon, together with symbols of the other three cardinal directions, exist on numerous gravestone bas-reliefs and walls of burial structures. Interestingly, one can find the azure dragon as a helper of the god of wealth in the folk pictures of conjuring nature and auspicious spirit. At that, the dragon was depicted as scattering wealth and filling a kind of a horn of plenty, a special vase that gathers treasures, with wonderful pearls, which are exuding flames, as well as gold, silver, and corals. The god of wealth, who was portrayed as riding either a dragon or a tiger, was especially revered by merchants. A constant attribute of the Chinese god of wealth in folk images was usually the dragon associated with money. Again, if one compares all this information with the characteristics of the left essence, slyness, pridefulness, deceit, desire for secret power, then a totally different underlying motive of this entire legend becomes apparent. It must be mentioned that in ancient China, the green dragon was a very popular, and as they would say today, widely promoted character. It was presented to people as a symbol of spring, changes, and the East. But this is already a substitution of notions, an associative fusion with an image previously popular with tribes, which is older and more significant in mythology, and which combines the features of a bird, and later of a human face, and a snake. Such an image is represented in the ancient Chinese mythology. For example, in the archaic female deity of the mother progenitress Nuwa. Nuwa, a woman gently sliding into the other world like water, the one having a connection both with the earthly and the heavenly worlds. In the legends, she was called the creator of all things and all people. Moreover, legends have it that she created a girl first, looking at her own reflection in the water, and only later did she create many other mortals, men and women. After uniting the last, she made them procreate on their own and imposed on them the duty of raising children. In the cosmogony of southeastern China, she was assigned the major role of a creating deity. It was believed that she had supernatural powers and was capable of making 70 transformations in one day. This is an echo of the knowledge about 72 dimensions and of the fact that a deity creates from the 72nd and the first dimensions, and these two dimensions influence the other 70. She was associated with victory over the black dragon, which was an embodiment of evil spirits, with the restoration of cosmic equilibrium, which had been disturbed as a result of a catastrophe during which the 4 earthly pillars collapsed. Moreover, it is to this creating divine feminine hypostasis that the greenish-blue color was inherent. In the mythology of different peoples, it embodied the element of water and of the feminine cosmic principle. This is a special color, indicating certain achievements in spiritual practices. I shall speak of it in more detail later. And now I will just note that even in the traditional view of the Chinese, the green and blue segment of the color spectrum is a single whole and is marked with the hieroglyphs that combine the meaning of green and blue. Mother Progenitress Nuwa was often portrayed together with a similar to her Fuxi, a being with a human body and a snake's tail instead of legs. At that, their bodies were intertwined. People who did not possess sacred knowledge interpreted such an interlacing as matrimonial intimacy. Actually, in many cases, especially in the ancient images of such divine characters, one can clearly trace sharing of the knowledge about the world as well as about the meditation tools used by man to achieve the highest spiritual state. Their symbols were often associated with a circle and a square. The founder of the civilization, culture hero Fuxi, who was considered by legends to be Nuwa's brother and later even her husband, also combined traits of a bird and a snake. Although earlier being a hero of the epos of tribes, he was portrayed precisely in the bird's image and was revered as a deity of the East. By the way, his name means the one who ambushed sacrificial animals. As I have already said, Fuxi is mentioned as the first creator of the hieroglyphic writing in signs, and it was already much later that people started to call him dragon-like and associate him in legends with the long dragon and draconian attributes. There is also another interesting point. Different cosmological myths were inherent in ancient Chinese mythology, including those about the creation of the ordered world, thanks to the divine feminine principle, the forces of Allat. But what is today's emphasis? The modern world knows that Chinese mythology and philosophy are based on the yin-yang principle, that is the myth about the formation of the world as a struggle of two principles which on the one hand disturb the highest harmony of existence and on the other hand restore it. As present-day philosophers say, the principle of the idea of dynamic balance of alternative tendencies. In other words, in the modern world, new generations know nothing about the original mythology which described the beginning of the world's conception by spiritual forces and its ordering by the divine feminine principle. The fundamental Chinese philosophy begins right with the assertion of the idea of the world's duality, the unity and struggle of the two opposing principles, that is, with the stage of manifestation of the material world, of the forces of the animal mind, and their struggle with the creating divine principle. The question is, why has this particular myth been hyped around the world today, and why is this particular dominating principle being asserted? I think it will not be difficult for clever people to find the answer to this question, especially once they have basic knowledge. So the appearance of the dragon Queen Long in the world was presented in the mythology already as none other than a happy omen. images of the green dragon were popularized as having an auspicious meaning and bringing untold earthly wealth. Sometimes during marches, a banner with its image was even carried in front of the troops, whereas a banner with an image of the white tiger was carried behind the army. However, if we trace the roots of such hype, they will lead to the ancient occult secret society, the Green Dragon, which has existed on the territory of China since ancient times, and thus clandestine, not exactly good deeds throughout the world. Anastasia. Yes, I mentioned this occult society in the book Sensei 4 while describing some little-known facts about the events and people that triggered World War II. In fact, as you noted very accurately then, everything is in plain sight for those who know. Rigdon. Absolutely. By the way, speaking of military campaigns, the governors, politicians, and priests who knew about the special symbols and signs that activate aggression in the masses have used them in such campaigns since ancient times, depicting them on shields and banners. And this was not only in China, but in other countries as well. Let us take, for instance, the Assyrian kingdom, which contemporary historians call the first known world state founded on blood and conquest. Anastasia. Our history, unfortunately, is still being written under the dictation of the Archon's ideology, with the emphasis being made not on the first societies in the world, in terms of spiritual achievement of the human civilization, but on the first communities built on aggression and conquest of foreign lands. Rigdon. Well, it is in people's own hands to change the situation. So what did combat badges of the Assyrian army look like? They were mainly a diagonal cross in a circle with a vertical bar and two animals on each side, or an archer pointing his arrow to one of the sides. In other words, symbols and signs that indicated activation of the lateral essences. Anastasia. Assyrian combat badges? That's right. I read about them after you had mentioned the monogram of Constantine the Great, the labarum, a symbol of the Chaldean cosmology. The labarum was used as a military banner by the last Roman emperors before the division of the Roman Empire into the western part and the eastern part, Byzantine Empire. Already back then, all these standards and banners were used to simplify control of the troops. And if we speak about the Assyrian kingdom, everything is clear there. At a certain period of time, Babylonia, where the priestly circles among the Chaldeans were originally from, was a part of Assyria, and the Assyrians themselves practiced a religion which was similar to the religion of the Babylonians. Yes, it's surprising that people don't see the obvious, because during the rule of Constantine the Great and after it, they started to widely use in religion the sign of aggression, the monogram of Constantine the Great, which had long been used during the conduct of wars. Now it is placed in many cities of the world and can be seen by many people. But this is a war without declaring war. Someone obviously knew much more about this sign when they imposed it upon Constantine as a symbol of the new state religion of a country so powerful in the world at that time. Rigdon. Regrettably, that is so. Many people, when they go to a religious temple of the denomination which they consider themselves to be a part of, practically do not notice what signs and symbols surround them and for what purpose they're placed there. But a person definitely feels their work by his state. It is just that given the fact that no one discloses the true purpose of such signs to him, it is natural that a person will not even try to understand his compulsive psychological state. He considers such a state to be natural because he has repeatedly experienced it while attending similar institutions. And if one looks carefully, In such places, one can see a variety of signs activating both the spiritual nature in man, aspiration for God, as well as the animal nature, through awakening subconscious fears. Very often, in cultish and religious institutions, there are many more signs which negatively affect the human psyche than those that stimulate development and strengthening of the spiritual nature in person. Why? It is all about the goals and objectives, namely manipulation techniques, of one or another religion, practice which has been inherited from religions of the past and perfected over centuries. The first rule in such technologies is an inconspicuous preparation of the churchgoer's psyche for influencing his subconscious in such a way that he would implicitly follow veiled orders of the manipulator while at the same time believing that he is doing it of his own free will. Anastasia. And signs are precisely that very instrument of influence which unfailingly affect the subconscious of any person. Rigdon. Quite so. People have had the knowledge about this since ancient times. Suffice it to look at the drawings and signs of the Paleolithic era. Unfortunately, today this information is not possessed by the majority of people like it was in the days of old, but only by those who are at the ruling top of the nations. Nonetheless, the situation can be helped, if only that very majority so wishes. So the human psyche clearly picks up this influence of signs through the subconscious, because the structure of the psyche is based on the unconscious. In this case, consciousness has a subordinate function. And signs influence, let us put it this way, the archetypal component of an individual's psyche. Their effect is based on the individual's predisposition to unconscious suggestion. What happens if mostly negative signs are present in such cultish and religious establishments? A person goes to such institutions, as a rule, when an inner necessity for it matures in him. That is, if we exclude popular religious holidays or events which are typical to this or that nationality, when people traditionally visit temples to keep their friends and relatives company. In other words, when a spiritual surge occurs, but the personality cannot understand what exactly is happening to it. Naturally, such necessity intuitively leads a person to the place where he expects to get answers to his inner questions. That is why, when heading to such establishments, he is open to dialogue. That is, he has a certain degree of trust in religious workers. If a person ends up in a religious establishment with mostly positive signs, which strengthen the perception of the deepest feelings from the spiritual nature by the personality, this would inspire such a person even more, increasing the feeling of love and gratitude towards God, give rise inside him to the state of fearlessness, an expanded state of consciousness, and comprehensive perception of the world. Do you see the difference? The person would experience not fanaticism or strong emotions with yells of hallelujah in the fits of mass hysteria instigated by the crowd's great desire to save their body and live in it forever. By the way, after such emotions from the animal nature, a person once alone usually experiences emptiness, whereas he would actually feel exactly the fullness of the awakening of the deepest feelings, which give awareness, a spiritual surge of energy, charge him with eagerness to create for the sake of saving his soul and not the body. This is an example of how things in theory should be now if the human society really had the spiritual guideline for its development. But note that everything is happening in exactly the opposite way in the world. Why? Because the basis for creating any religion as an institution for controlling the masses is power and manipulation, camouflaged as spiritual care for people. That is why today, in the majority of cases, there are many more negative working signs in such cultish and religious establishments than there are positive ones. When mostly negative signs are placed in such establishments, they simply redirect the spiritual surge of a person, relatively speaking, like through the prism, which we have already discussed, towards awakening inner subconscious fears and material desires in him, activating at the same time one or another lateral or the back essence. These signs create imbalance in the psyche, narrow consciousness, and escalate the state of fear, despair, and servile behavior in an individual. In such a state, he takes any information on faith. At the same time, a small number of positive signs in such establishments stimulate in a person hope for the future and the desire to live. In religious establishments, this is, as a rule, a standard formula of such a combination of signs which prepares a person for subsequent verbal suggestion, hypnotism from religious workers of one or another religion. As a result of such unspoken preliminary conditioning by signs, which strengthens subsequent verbal suggestions, the churchgoers, including one would think grown-up intelligent people who have higher education and scientific degrees, become as trusting as children. They're willing to listen to any cock and bull story told by the people clothed in religious garments without even getting into the heart of the matter, which are the suggestions from the animal mind, and where indeed the grains are given that stimulate their spiritual growth. Anastasia. Yes, in such a state of hopelessness or panic of a drowning person, people grasp at any straw extended to them. So at first, fear is triggered in an individual, and then the manipulator demonstrates a way to get rid of this fear, though in the light that is favorable for him. Rigdon. Yes, this can be figuratively compared to a situation when a person is put into a cell and then driven to a nervous breakdown through threats and beating. Afterwards, a cellmate is sent to him who promises to supposedly release him from this confinement because he knows how. Naturally, the person begins to trust him, believing that he will save him from suffering, starts to treat his new friend with dignity and respect, for the latter gives him a feeling of hope, or rather supports in him an illusion of imminent liberation. However, note that the cellmate only promises, doing nothing to really set this person free, because he himself is a captive slave who is simply doing his job. It is the same in religion. Its servants are like cellmates who are quite far from being free themselves. However, while advocating their religion, as a rule, they state that a person does not have a single chance of salvation unless he is a follower of their teaching, who must adhere to all their rules and rights, be an eternal sponsor, political electorate fulfilling the will of their priests. While listening to promises of such a religious cellmate about his salvation, the person eventually becomes ready to fulfill any of his requests, considering it to be his duty, his wish, his conscious participation. This mechanism of manipulation is effective as long as it is hidden from human consciousness, for the manipulator will never admit his actions. And if this is the system that has been running smoothly for centuries, then oftentimes workers of this or that religion are themselves unaware of what exactly they're doing and whom they really serve. Anastasia. In general, hidden manipulation of religious priests who pursue the goal of subordinating as many people as possible to their power is that they first create appropriate conditions and a source of fear for the person, and then act as intermediaries for a temporary resolution of the person's internal conflict, which has emerged as a result of this, naturally in a form that is favorable to them. The more things there are that are unclear to a person, the lower is the person's degree of awareness of what is happening to him, and the greater the fear that these unclear things instill in him. Moreover, This process intensifies and loops the personality's attention in on itself. As for priests, the more fear they instill in the nations that are enslaved by their ideology, the stronger their power and the greater their authority, supported by these same nations. Rigden. Yes, it is just that there is real manipulation of human feelings going on, and in favor of the animal mind at that. These signs, which negatively affect the human psyche, for instance, the sign of an aggressive reverse swastika, are placed in such religious institutions, as a rule, within the churchgoer's sight. However, they're placed in such a way that they do not attract attention to themselves unless you know about them. They can be added to patterns or decorations of the external interior, the temple painting of walls or the floor, elements of carving and sculpture, or they can be included onto items and clothes of priests and so on. It should be understood that at the subconscious level, any person registers a large part of information from the visible world, even if he is consciously focused on something else. So a person visits such institutions when he has an inner need for it, during a spiritual search, or when he wants to get rid of his inner, emotional suffering, which, as a matter of fact, is the consequence of a long-term dominance of the animal nature in him. In such moments, a person is open and is searching for help. But instead of spiritual help, in most cases, in such institutions, he receives material substitutions and a kind of looping of his state. Namely, negative signs intensify subconscious fears in him, while religious workers supplement those with their standard verbal suggestions, as a result of which certain material wishes and aspirations are formed in a person. The person focuses the power of his attention on this, and that in turn further reinforces the lateral and the back essence's influence on him. Anastasia. Yes, the signs with negative influence also trigger and additionally stimulate in people the mechanisms of suggestion, imitation, and reciprocal emotional infection that are typical for spontaneous behavior of the masses. These are the tools that actively influence the human psyche and create corresponding emotional tension. And ministers of religion, with the help of verbal influence, simply form a culmination and a resolution of these emotions in the direction they need. Thus, an artificially created psychological attachment takes place. A believer gets attached to one or another religion, and his personal identification with this particular community takes place. Rigden. That is correct. So the influence of signs on the human being is merely physics. The process of their operation can be compared to a button that switches on a light bulb. People press the button when they need to create certain conditions for their work, to artificially light a dark room. At the same time, they do not even properly understand how this process takes place, what electric energy is exactly, and what is its true nature. There are several signs which have been used since ancient times to activate the animal nature in human. Naturally, the activation of such signs bodes no good for society, but people themselves choose what emotions and thoughts to give preference to and what to apply the power of their attention to. Anastasia. Yes, the proverbial human choice.